Welcome to Northlandia, a place to bring your curiosity, because here you will find curiosities. I'm Dan Williamson with the Duluth News Tribune, and I will be your guide as we discover unique and fascinating stories right here in the Northlands. Here, we celebrate the region's distinctive people, places, and history. In this episode, we explore the origins of a museum on the Iron Range, but this one doesn't involve taconites. Instead, transits with the Greyhound Bus Museum in Hibbing. Let's venture forth into Northlandia. And joining us for this adventure, the one and only Terry Caddo, DNT Features reporter. Terry, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Dan, and welcome to Northlandia.
Thank you. I'm excited for this conversation, and this is a very unique story, as all Northlandia stories are. Terry, how did you find this story?
So this is definitely a case where I was just looking around for a good idea, and I came across it, and I realized, despite growing up half an hour away from Hibbing, I'd never been to the Greyhound Bus Museum. I'd taken a lot of trips to a lot of the area museums. I've been down in the mine. I've been, to the History of Mining Museum or the Minnesota Discovery Center back when it was called Iron World. It's fine. And I've been to a lot of those different places, but I'd never been to the Greyhound Bus Museum. And I was like, well, I think it's time to change that. I think it's time to delve into that history. And why is it in Hibbing anyway? Because I think I knew that it started, the company had basically started there, but I didn't fully understand how that was the case, how that came to be.
Makes sense. And for those that are unaware, by the way, you're a Gilbert gal.
Yes, I am from Gilbert.
Okay. And how far is Gilbert from Hibbing?
Half an hour drive.
Half-hour drive. All right.
Yep. Definitely a place. That was like the big trip is like, oh, we're going to go to Hibbing for like a day. Oh my goodness, this is a good trip. Same as Duluth. Duluth was a big deal too because it's an hour.
And of course, you made the trip yourself, this time not from Gilbert to Hibbing, but rather Duluth to Hibbing. You made the trip. What were your impressions?
First off, when you first drive there, one of the first things that you see is a sign as you're like entering onto the property that says Greyhound Bus Museum, something for everyone. And I was like, okay, that's promising. That sounds good. Okay. Hopefully that means they have something for me. And they definitely did. They had a lot of very interesting things. And I walked in and I got to know the two people, one who's a volunteer and one who works for the museum. And they showed me around and introduced me to a lot of the history behind how that museum came to be there and how the company came to originate from there.
What were you surprised to learn during this visit?
So there were a couple of things. First of all, the fact that this all started because two Swedish immigrant gentlemen on the Iron Range in 1914 were trying to sell hupmobiles. Have you heard of a hupmobile?
I have not. How do you spell that?
No, neither had I. Hupmobile, hupmobile.
Interesting. Okay.
Right? I thought that was fascinating. So they had these 7-passenger hupmobiles, and they discovered that people didn't really want to buy them because they cost like $700, and the average wage back then was about $1.25 per day. Not per hour. Per day. So they're like, that's going to take a long time to try and save money for that. But people wanted to go for test rides in them, or they wanted to just, ride on them. They found them fascinating. So they thought, okay, I think we need to start charging people for these rides and actually like make a route. So that's kind of how this came to be, is they started making a route between another city kind of close by to Hibbing called Alice. So Alice to Hibbing, people would ride that to go and do different business at like the general store or wherever they needed to go shopping. And they say back then that they would drive miners to work. The gentleman who I talked to at the museum kind of took a point of contention with that because he's like, well, most of the cities had a mine in the city, so you could literally walk to work. But definitely, they were giving people rides, and then it slowly grew from there.
And this predates buses.
So yeah, these were the first bus, like not buses, but then they became buses. They took another vehicle that was like a truck kind of style body, and they put in a bunch of seats in them, and those became the first buses.
Wow.
Yeah.
We were talking before we started recording, and both you and I were wondering if we had been on Greyhound buses. And I think I have. I'm not 100% sure. I know you said at the museum you could get on a bus. You yourself didn't.
Several buses. They have buses from like nearly every decade that Greyhound has been around. Maybe not so much of the newer ones, but definitely some of the ones from like the 30s all the way through like the 90s. So you can definitely take a look and get on any of those that you would like, which is pretty fun. And that's if you have a kid, I hear that that's the kids' favorite part of it is being able to go on all these different type of buses. There's a little setup area where you can pretend to be a bus driver and try and drive, not actually drive, but like it's a little pretend, so it's a photo op more than anything. But I think kids really like that too. Yeah, and so it's definitely a thing. As for the question, getting back to it, I haven't ridden a Greyhound bus, but I have a connection in that my mom has a lot of stories of taking them. She grew up in Gilbert, but her family moved to Montana as a teenager, so then she had to take Greyhound buses between her home and college in Montana. So that was definitely a thing. Yeah, that's kind of the connection.
Interesting connection, too. How long were those rides, do you know?
I do not know. I will have to ask her that. Didn't think about asking her that in preparation for this. She just said, well, I had to ride buses. And I was like, oh, sure, fair enough.
Not that you have to be the PR person, but from what you saw, would you go back to this museum?
If you're into anything like vehicle related, like if you're somebody who's going to go check out the train depot, I think it's worth a drive up to go and check out this place as well. Like if you're into transportation and you're into that, it's definitely very niche. It's a niche audience for sure. I'm going to stick to it. They do have something for everyone. It's just, you might not know what it is at first, especially because when I tell you this other bit that I also found incredibly fascinating about it, it is also a hotspot for paranormal activity.
Oh my goodness. Okay, do tell. I'm all ears right now.
Yes, that came up at the end of our conversation, and I was just fascinated by it. I was like, I'm sorry, what? And they're like, yeah, we have paranormal investigators who come here all the time, and they'll pay about $200 to spend the night here. We just have a rule that they have to be out by the time the museum opens the next day. So yeah, if you're into paranormal investigations, there are a couple of different apparitions that people see there. Most popular, or the one that people see the most, is a little girl, and that's in the basement level of this place. And so they're not really sure where that comes from or why that's the thing, but it's a little girl, and apparently she likes candy, so if you leave candy around, she might move it on you.
Wow.
These are the stories I was told.
Unbelievable. Well, I had never heard this. And
Right?
had you heard any of these rumors before you went up there?
No, not until we started talking about it. Yeah, because I asked the woman who works behind the desk, who shows people around and works for the museum. I'd asked her, what are the most commonly asked questions that you get? And so the most commonly asked questions were, why are they called greyhounds? Which, by the way, that's because somebody back in the day thought the gray buses moving on the roads really quickly looked like greyhounds running in a track. Makes sense.
Yes.
So, why greyhounds? Why is this museum here? Which we answered, it's because it's the origin point. And third question, is it really haunted? Now, the museum is right next to a cemetery in Hibbing. So you drive past the cemetery as you're going to the museum. So that's another thing. It also was a site where historically there was like a yellow fever outbreak and it was a quarantine zone. So people have, yeah, it has an interesting history for sure.
No doubt about it. Now,
Yeah.
I would think that the paranormal activity probably happens at night. So for those that aren't into that necessarily daytime, you're probably
fine.
okay.
There was only one thing that happened while I was there. It wasn't while I was there. It had been happening since the day before. So they have this sound system in the first room that you go in that tells you the history. It just has a little bit of narration that plays. It is supposed to play when somebody walks into that room. For years, it hasn't worked. So they just figured, okay, that's a right, we don't have that happening. But there's a lot of information on the walls, and you can learn plenty by taking a tour. As of Monday, out of nowhere, it just started clicking on and playing all day, and then it wouldn't stop. It just kept looping over and over and over again, which is what it does. It's on a loop. So they weren't sure exactly why that had started. Now, both of the folks that I talked to, they're more skeptical about ghosts. They're like, that's more like an electrical anomaly than paranormal, but yeah, that was definitely a thing where I was like, huh, that's interesting, because I did notice it as I walked in, and I figured that just plays all the time. Nope, it's been short-circuiting.
I know I'll joke with some coworkers about, computers or cameras or, other pieces of machinery having a mind of their own.
Oh,
and
yeah.
so, maybe maybe that does happen outside the walls of the D&T office too.
Well, anytime you have technology, you always have to plan for the, not the worst, but kind of a little bit. Yeah, so that was pretty fascinating too. But again, I think you're fine if you're not someone who's into paranormal. If you're just there for the buses, go there for the buses. You can go there and see all the different uniforms that they have. If someone in your life was a Greyhound bus driver and you want to donate their uniform, unless it's from 1930s, They probably already have it. Just FYI, I was informed that they have like 72 plus extra uniforms from people who are like, my dad was a Greyhound bus driver. Let me give you his uniform. And they're like, we have a lot. It's okay. Thank you. So if you're into that, if you want to see what those look like, that's the place to go.
Good to know. And if you're into paranormal activity, then it sounds like the evening is...
Yes. So again, you will have to pay to stay overnight. So,
But Terry, I think the last question I have for you is just, how does this fit into Northlandia?
Well, that's a great question. I think the biggest thing is that it's a very unique story. To take 7 passengers on a 2-mile journey and turn that into a business that grew and grew until it's nationwide and now even owned like by an international company and still existing to this day. That's a pretty unique story. And it happened because there were a couple of Swedish immigrants who wanted to sell some vehicles and instead ended up taking people for a ride. That's pretty unique. I think that can't be said about a lot of places.
Absolutely. And of course, you're hearing the backstory through audio, but for those that would like to read more about this, Terry, where can people find your Northlandia article?
They can find it at DuluthNewsTribune.com and they can look up Northlandia. It's right there.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for joining us on this venture into Northlandia. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to support us, consider becoming a subscriber of the Duluth News Tribune at DuluthNewsTribune.com/subscribe. Join us again next time and discover the extraordinary stories that you just might miss if you're not in the right place at the right time, ready to step off the beaten path with no rush to return here in Northlandia.